The room was completely still. Not the kind of still that comes from peace, the kind that comes from shock. 200 people dressed in their finest, glasses raised, cameras ready. A ballroom wrapped in gold light and the low hum of a string quartet. The kind of event that makes you feel like history is being made. And it was. A billion-dollar acquisition. The kind of deal that reshapes industries, ends careers, and starts legacies. At the center of it all was one man walking slowly toward the signing table. Calm. Unhurried. Like he had been here before. Like the weight of it didn't move him at all. And in the third row, a woman in a silver dress reached for her champagne, and nearly dropped it. Because she knew him. Not as the man the financial press had been calling the quiet giant of American private equity. Not as the figure whose name had been whispered in boardrooms for the past 3 years. She knew him as the man she had publicly humiliated at a restaurant on a Tuesday night 6 months ago. The man whose ring she had slid back across a white tablecloth in front of strangers. The man she left for someone wealthier. Someone flashier. Someone she thought was more of a man. And now he was purchasing the company her new fiancé worked for. But here's the thing, the deal wasn't even the most shocking part of this story. The most shocking part was what she discovered after the pen hit the paper. If you're watching this right now, before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, go ahead and click that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because stories like this one, we tell them every week. Now, to understand how we got here, we need to go back to the beginning. Not to the ballroom. Not to the signing table. We need to go back to a small apartment in Columbus, Ohio, and a young man named Daniel Mercer who grew up believing that if you were decent and disciplined and patient, life would eventually make sense. Daniel was not the kind of man who showed up in rooms and demanded attention. He was 34 years old, medium height, quietly built, with the kind of steady eyes that made people feel like they were being listened to. He drove a 7-year-old Ford F-150 that he serviced himself on Saturday mornings. He wore the same watch his grandfather had worn. He paid his rent 3 months in advance and kept his word to the point that people in his life had stopped using contracts around him, not out of carelessness, but out of trust. He had grown up the second son of a Baptist minister in Columbus. His father had died when Daniel was 19, leaving behind a family with no savings, a house with a leaky roof, and 3 younger siblings who needed someone to hold it together. Daniel held it together. He worked 2 jobs through college, graduated quietly with a degree in finance, and spent the next decade building something that almost nobody in his personal life fully understood. He was careful about that. Intentional, even. He had watched enough men in his father's congregation lose friendships, marriages, and peace of mind because of what money does to the people around you when they know about it. So Daniel kept his professional life separate. Not out of secrecy, out of self-protection. The people who needed to know, knew. Everyone else saw a man who drove a used truck and ate leftovers and took his fiancée to the same diner on Friday nights because it was the one where they'd had their first date. Her name was Simone Ashworth. And from the outside, they looked like they fit together. She was beautiful in the way that made rooms pause, tall, sharp-featured, with a laugh that arrived quickly and left just as fast when she felt uncomfortable. She had grown up in a different kind of household. Her father was a commercial real estate broker who drove a new car every 2 years and kept a boat he rarely used. Simone had been raised on the understanding that appearance was a form of communication, that what you drove and what you wore and where you vacationed told the world exactly how seriously to take you. She had loved Daniel once. Or at least she had loved the version of him she thought she was seeing, a stable man, a thoughtful man, someone steady in a world that moved too fast. But stability, she was slowly learning, wasn't enough. Not when her friends were posting vacation photos from Mykonos and Aspen. Not when her colleague had just gotten engaged to a hedge fund manager and her engagement ring made Simone's feel somehow smaller than it was. Not when a man named Tyler Weston started showing up at every social event she attended, smelling like cedar and confidence, wearing a Patek Philippe and laughing like nothing could threaten him. Daniel noticed the shift the way you notice a season changing, not in a single moment but in the accumulation of small details that eventually become impossible to ignore. She stopped asking about his day. She started dressing differently for events where he wasn't invited. She took calls she didn't explain and left rooms to take them. Expensive things started appearing in their apartment: a designer handbag, a pair of earrings, a leather travel case with initials that were not hers and not his. She said they were client gifts. She said it without looking at him. He said nothing. Not because he didn't have questions, but because Daniel Mercer had learned early in life that confrontation without evidence was just noise, and he had spent too many years being disciplined to become undisciplined now. But one evening, something slipped. He was sitting in the kitchen when his phone rang. It was his operations director, a man named Graham Cole, who had run the back end of Daniel's investment group for 6 years. Graham didn't call unless it mattered. Daniel walked to the window and answered. The conversation lasted less than 90 seconds. When he hung up, he turned around and found Simone standing in the doorway. She had only caught one sentence. "Push the acquisition to next week, the board needs the full picture before we move." He changed the subject. She let him. But she didn't let go of it. She mentioned it to Tyler Weston the following Thursday over drinks she had not told Daniel about. Tyler had laughed. "What board?" he'd said. "Daniel's a finance guy, babe. He manages some portfolios. It's not that deep." And she had laughed too. Because it was easier to laugh. Because if Tyler was right, then she wasn't leaving a man for nothing, she was leaving a man for something better. That distinction mattered to her more than she was willing to admit. Tyler Weston was everything the eye could see and appreciate immediately. He was 38, ran a boutique private equity firm out of a glass-walled office in downtown Cincinnati, and had a personal brand built on visibility. He went to the right events. He knew the right people. He posted the right photos: galas, golf courses, charity dinners, first-class flights with a casual caption as if he'd forgotten to mention the destination. He wore his success loudly. He wanted people to look. He needed them to. And Simone, who had grown up believing that worth was visible, found herself watching him like a window into the life she thought she was supposed to be living. She chose a Tuesday. Later, the people who knew Daniel would say that was the detail that said the most: not a special occasion, not a weekend. A Tuesday. A neutral night. A night that was supposed to cost nothing and mean nothing after. She asked him to meet her at a restaurant called Linden's in the Brewery District. White tablecloths, low lighting, the kind of place where conversations carry. Daniel arrived wearing a dark blue sweater. He had come from a meeting, but he hadn't said what kind. He sat across from her and ordered water and looked at her the way he always looked at her, steady, open, like he had nowhere else he needed to be. She didn't let that settle. She placed the ring on the table between them. Not slid, placed. Careful and deliberate, like she had practiced the motion. She said, "I need someone who can give me the life I deserve, Daniel. You're a good person. But good isn't enough." She said she was in love with someone else. She said the engagement was over. And she said it at a volume that, whether she intended it or not, could be heard by the table nearest to them. A couple glanced over. A waiter paused at the service station. Daniel looked at the ring. Then at her. He did not raise his voice. He did not beg. He did not perform grief for the room. He simply asked, "Are you certain?" She said yes. She picked up her bag and walked out. The restaurant was quiet in that uncomfortable way that follows a scene. People looked down at their plates. A few whispered. And then the manager, a man named Glenn Pryor who had worked at Linden's for 11 years, walked over to Daniel's table and said, quietly, "Sir, would you like me to have the private dining room prepared?" Daniel looked up at him. "That won't be necessary tonight, Glenn." He left a tip that covered the table for the hour. He walked out to the parking lot, got into his truck, and drove to a building in the short north neighborhood of Columbus that had no signage on the outside. He took an elevator to the 14th floor and spent the next 3 hours in a boardroom with 7 people reviewing a term sheet for the largest acquisition his investment group had ever attempted. His executive assistant, a sharp young woman named Brianna Hayes, later said she had never seen him more focused than he was that night. Not angry. Not rattled. Just focused. Here is what Simone Ashworth did not know about the man she left on a Tuesday night. Daniel Mercer was the principal co-founder and silent majority shareholder of Mercer Whitfield Capital, a private investment group that had, over the course of 11 years, accumulated controlling interests in 47 companies across the logistics, healthcare infrastructure, and commercial real estate sectors. The firm managed just under $4 billion in assets. It did not advertise. It did not seek press. Daniel had structured it that way deliberately. His face appeared in no promotional materials. His name appeared on no public-facing websites. The investors who worked with him found him by reputation and referral only. He had given quietly to his father's former congregation for a decade. He had anonymously funded a scholarship program at his high school. He had, some years earlier, quietly settled the debt on Simone's father's commercial property when a loan default had threatened to collapse the man's business, using a series of LLC transfers that left no fingerprints traceable to Daniel himself. He had never mentioned it. Not once. And the restaurant where Simone had returned his ring, Linden's in the Brewery District, was a property inside a mixed-use development block that Mercer Whitfield Capital had acquired 4 years prior through a commercial real estate subsidiary. Glenn Pryor, the manager, knew. He had known for years. He'd never said a word, because Daniel had asked him not to. And then there was the matter of Tyler Weston's firm. Weston Capital Partners was a boutique private equity operation. Smart, well-positioned, and for the past 8 months, deep in negotiations to close a merger that Tyler had personally staked his professional reputation on. A merger that, if completed, would nearly triple the value of his firm and cement him as a serious player in the Midwest finance world. He had told Simone about it in the first week of their relationship. He had used it to promise her a future. He had told her the deal was 90% closed. What he had not told her, because he did not know, was that the approval he needed required the sign-off of a single silent investor who sat on the board of the acquiring firm. A quiet man. An unhurried man. A man who drove an old Ford F-150 and wore his grandfather's watch and had, as of 3 weeks ago, officially become her ex-fiancé. The first sign that something was wrong came 18 days after the breakup. A board meeting for the Weston merger was postponed without explanation. Tyler's contact at the acquiring firm gave him a standard delay notice, additional review required at the investor level, and told him to expect a revised timeline. Tyler was annoyed but not alarmed. Deals got delayed. It happened. He booked a dinner reservation at a rooftop restaurant and told Simone the delay was routine. She believed him. She wanted to. The second sign came 11 days later. 2 of the merger's key financial approvals were placed on indefinite hold. An investor of record had requested what the legal team described as a comprehensive reevaluation of risk exposure across the full portfolio. Tyler called his attorney. His attorney called the firm's board contact. The board contact said the request had come from a man named Daniel Mercer, who had recently been confirmed as the silent majority stakeholder in Meridian Holdings, the acquiring company. Tyler didn't recognize the name at first. Then he pulled the name up on a contact list from an industry event 2 years prior. A Columbus man. Finance. Drove a truck. He sat in his office for a long moment. And then he said, out loud to an empty room, the quietest 4-letter word he'd ever said. Meanwhile, something was happening to Simone that she hadn't anticipated, and couldn't stop. It started with a phone call from her father, Raymond Ashworth, who had called to congratulate her on her engagement to Tyler. In the middle of the conversation, her father had made an offhand comment about how grateful he was that his business had survived that rough stretch 4 years ago. "You know," he'd said, "I never actually found out who came in on that quiet refinancing. My attorney always said it was handled through an LLC and the investor preferred no contact. But whoever it was saved my life, Simone. Saved everything." She hadn't thought much of it then. But 3 nights later, she was cleaning out a box of things Daniel had left at her apartment: books, a charger, a folder of financial documents she'd been meaning to return, and she found, tucked inside the folder, a copy of a legal summary she wasn't supposed to have seen. It was a closing memo for a commercial property debt restructuring. The LLC on the document was titled Carthage Equity Holdings. And attached to the back of the document, a handwritten note from Daniel's attorney: RC Property Resolved. Per client instructions, no contact. Final. RC. Raymond Collins Ashworth. Her father. She sat on the floor of her hallway for a long time that night. The folder open in her lap. The document in her hands. She thought about the ring she had placed on the table at Lyndon's. She thought about the sentence she had said, "Good isn't enough," and what it now cost her to hear it played back in her own head. She started pulling at threads. She called her former colleague, a woman named Dana Parrott, who worked in commercial real estate law and had once mentioned knowing the managing partner of Mercer Whitfield Capital. Dana said yes, she knew of Daniel Mercer. She said the firm was regarded in their circles as one of the most careful and credible private investment operations in the Midwest. She said Daniel was known for being quiet and deliberate and almost obsessively private. She said his name appeared in very few documents that weren't locked behind NDAs. She said, "Wait, you said Daniel Mercer. Simone. Was that your Daniel?" Simone didn't answer. Not out loud. She also found out, through a separate conversation she shouldn't have had but couldn't stop herself from having, that Lyndon's restaurant, where she had ended the engagement, was part of a commercial block managed by a Mercer Whitfield subsidiary. That the table she had chosen. The tablecloth. The candlelight. The waiter who had paused. The manager who had offered the private room. All of it. She had returned his ring in his building. She felt the weight of irony press down on her in a way that made it difficult to breathe. And still, the most painful revelation came last. She learned, from a source she trusted, a woman who had attended the same graduate program as Daniel's operations director Graham Cole, that Daniel had, in the early days of their relationship, quietly used a Mercer Whitfield subsidiary to help save Simone's job after a corporate restructuring at her previous employer had flagged her position for elimination. He had never said a word. Never asked for acknowledgement. Never held it over her. He had simply moved pieces quietly so that her life didn't fall apart, and then gone home and eaten takeout with her on the couch and let her believe that the world had just worked out in her favor. That was the moment Simone understood something that she couldn't unfeel. She hadn't just left a wealthy man. She had left someone who had used that wealth exclusively to protect her without telling her, and who had never once asked for credit. That was not a man you replaced. That was a man you spent a lifetime looking for and didn't recognize until he was gone. And she had returned his ring in his building. On a Tuesday. Tyler Weston arrived at Meridian Holdings' downtown Columbus office on a Wednesday morning in late November wearing his best suit and carrying a pitch deck he had spent 14 days refining. He had told himself on the drive over that this was just business. That whatever personal history existed between this Mercer man and his fiancée had nothing to do with the deal. That a professional of Daniel's caliber would never let a personal grievance affect a financial decision of this magnitude. He told himself all of this because he needed to. He was shown into a conference room. Daniel arrived 7 minutes later, flanked by 2 attorneys and Graham Cole. He shook Tyler's hand without any visible recognition. He sat down. He put on his reading glasses. And then he proceeded to ask, for the next 2 hours, the most precise, methodical, quietly devastating series of due diligence questions that Tyler's attorney would later describe as the single most thorough line of examination I have witnessed in 22 years of deal work. Daniel never raised his voice. Never made a personal remark. Never gave Tyler the satisfaction of a single moment where personal grievance was visible. He reviewed every number. He questioned every projection. He flagged 3 risk exposures that Tyler's own team had classified as immaterial. He asked for additional documentation on 7 line items. And then he said, "Thank you for your time. We'll continue this after further review." Tyler walked to his car and sat there for 11 minutes before he trusted himself to drive. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment saying I'm still here. Let's see who's truly following this story. Because what comes next, the conversation that closed this chapter, is the part that nobody who was present in that room has ever been able to fully describe without pausing. 3 weeks after the meeting with Tyler, Daniel received a message from Simone. Short. Careful. She said she had learned some things. She said she wasn't asking for anything. She said she would understand if he didn't respond. But she needed him to know that she understood now what she had failed to understand before, and that she was sorry for the way it happened. He responded the same evening. He suggested coffee. She said yes. They met at a diner. Not Lyndon's. The one from their first date, a place called Morrison's on the east side, with vinyl booths and coffee that came in ceramic mugs that were slightly too hot to hold. Daniel arrived first. He was wearing jeans and the old watch. He ordered coffee and looked at the door when it opened. She came in looking like she hadn't fully slept in weeks. She sat across from him and wrapped both hands around her mug and said, "I know about my father's property. I know about my job. I know about Lyndon's." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I know you know." She asked him why. Why all of it, without telling her. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because if I had told you, it wouldn't have been care anymore. It would have been a transaction. You deserved care that didn't come with a bill." She looked out the window for a moment. When she looked back, her eyes were full. She said, "I told you good wasn't enough. I didn't know what good was." He didn't say anything to that right away. Let it sit there in the space between them, honest and irrevocable. After a while, he said, "You didn't leave me because you thought I was poor, Simone. You left because you believed worth was something you could see from across a room. I couldn't teach you that it isn't. That was something you had to learn on your own." She broke down. Not dramatically. Just quietly, in the way that happens when understanding arrives after the window has already closed. The acquisition was announced publicly on a Thursday morning in early December. The deal was valued at just over $1 billion. It was covered by 3 financial publications and 1 regional newspaper. Daniel did not give interviews. His attorney issued a brief statement. The signing ceremony was held at a hotel ballroom in Cincinnati, chosen because it was neutral ground between the parties and because one of Meridian's senior board members had insisted on a formal ceremony for the culture of the thing. There were 200 guests. Champagne was poured. Executives smiled. A string quartet played in the corner. And in the third row, dressed in silver and standing beside a man whose firm would now operate under Meridian Holdings' corporate umbrella, Simone Ashworth watched Daniel Mercer walk to the table, read the final page of the agreement without rushing, pick up the pen, and sign his name with the same stillness he brought to everything. There were no cameras catching her expression. No dramatic music swelling. Just the sound of the room exhaling, the flash of cameras, and the quiet applause of 200 people who understood that something significant had just happened, though none of them understood the full weight of what this particular moment cost the woman standing in the third row. She did not cry. She held her champagne glass steady. But she set it down before she was finished with it, and she didn't pick it up again. Daniel Mercer did not take Simone back. Not because he hadn't forgiven her. He had, in the unhurried, complete way he did most things. But forgiveness and reconciliation are two different countries, and he had spent enough of his life being careful to know when a door that had closed was better left that way. What he did do was approve a restructured version of the Weston merger, 3 months later, with conditions that Tyler's team called punishing but ultimately accepted. Tyler Weston got his deal. He also got a quiet education in the cost of dismissing men he hadn't bothered to learn anything about. Simone moved to Chicago 6 months after the signing ceremony. She took a senior position at a consulting firm she had wanted to join for years. She was good at her job. She dated carefully. She thought about the diner on the East Side more often than she expected to. And sometimes, when she was being honest with herself, really honest, in the way that only comes at night when there's no version of the story left to manage, she thought about what he had said at Morrison's. That she had believed worth was something you could see from across a room. She thought about all the things she had looked at. And all the things she had failed to see. Daniel kept his life the same. He drove the truck. He wore the watch. He funded the scholarship program and attended his father's former congregation on the first Sunday of every month. He started a mentorship program for first-generation college students interested in finance, quiet, private, no press release. He was 35 years old and had more wealth than he would ever be able to spend, and he used it the same way he always had, carefully, consistently, and almost entirely out of view. He was not a man who needed the world to know what he was worth. He had always known. He'd just been patient enough to wait for the world to catch up. And it had. In a ballroom in Cincinnati. On a Thursday in December. With a pen his grandfather had given him, on the day he graduated college, in a card that said, "Be so good they can't ignore you. Be so quiet they never see you coming." That was the story of Daniel Mercer. A man who was never what he appeared to be on the surface, and who never needed you to know it. Now before you go, I want to ask you something and I genuinely want to know your answer. If you were Daniel, could you have sat across from Simone at that diner and kept it together? Could you have signed that deal in that room, in front of the woman who left you, and felt nothing but peace? And here's the harder question, if you were Simone, would you have recognized what she had before it was gone? Or would the noise of the world, the social comparison, the pressure, the illusion that worth is visible, have drowned it out the same way it did for her? Leave your answer in the comments. Because the truth is, most of us have been one or the other at some point. Most of us have either been the person who was overlooked, or the person who did the overlooking. And the ones who are honest enough to admit which one they've been, those are the ones this story was really made for. If this one moved you, hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. We'll see you in the next one.